Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Tuesday evening West Coast Space Show program. I'm your host for the program, and thank you very much for tuning in. Uh, Interesting show with repeat guest Bryce Meyer. I'll read a brief bio for him in a few minutes, but we're going to be talking about food and agriculture and space farm. And Bryce has a new book coming out on January 2nd by Springer Publishing that he will talk to us about designing farms in space. So a couple of other really quick announcements. This is a full-length spatial program, and we have programs on Friday with one of our sponsors, Manuel Cuba, with Helix Space in Luxembourg, and Isaac Arthur on Sunday. And then please remember, I'm gone as I have end of the year follow-up appointments on my hearing surgery I had back in April, so I'll be in LA. But we come back live on Sunday, December 21st with Michael Lissner on Space Law Policy Review in the Year. Dr. Mike Griffin is with us regarding his recent Senate testimony on how we ought to do things to get to the moon before China. And then, as we move toward the end of the year, we have a book on extraterrestrial life by Dr. Antonio Del Popolo. I've seen the book, it's outstanding. He's in Italy. Tom Olson does his end of the year program, and we will probably do an end of the year fundraising program. And speaking of fundraising, this is our annual campaign. We are listener funded radio, which means everybody listening, those who listen on archives, we depend on you to support us, and we hope you do. And if you like us, why don't you help us out? I guess that'd be the $64 question, right? PayPal is easy, and it's on our homepage on the right, thespaceshow.com. On that PayPal button, you will find instructions for using Zelle, which is only through a United States bank. And Zelle uses our nonprofit's email address, david at giantleapfoundation.org. And it also gives our mailing address in Las Vegas, where we now live. In case you want to send a check to us, please make it payable to to either One Giant Leap Foundation or the Space Show, either one. For those of you tuning us in on Substack, thank you for that. You can subscribe on Substack, and you can also support us in different ways. But Substack has its own funding operation, so follow their instructions. If you need some guidance, email me at drspace@thespaceshow.com or go over to our website, thespaceshow.com. Go to our button on the far right for PayPal, and you can support us that way as well. We also take sponsorships, and we're happy to do so. Sponsors get a lot of perks, and it's $500 per calendar year, including banners on the Space Show website and also mentioning on all programs on the Substack site. And we certainly want to hear from you. So we are a live show. Don't forget, we do publish the Zoom telephone numbers, and they are on the Space Show blog for this show and every show. And they are also published as a text message on Substack. So if you want to participate and you're not able to be in our meeting room per our requirements for that, call us on the phone, talk with us, share with us, and we hope you will do so. So Bryce Meyer is with us, and he is a computer guy, a tech guy, an AI guy. He's also been involved in cyber and consulting, but he loves space, and he's an expert on space farms. And he's published books, not just on space farms, but children's books. He's part of the National Space Society infrastructure. and we're glad to have him back on the Space Show. Um, he did say he has a new book coming out, published by Springer, certainly a world-class publishing book, Designing Farms in Space, due on January 2nd. Bryce, welcome back to the show. Merry
Thank you, sir.
Christmas, Happy New Year. Good to see you again. Tell us about designing farms in space.
So, the idea was to write a comprehensive book on all the different technologies, not just plant crops or animal crops or, you know, maybe not even just the idea of balancing mass inside of a future space settlement, but all the other stuff that goes with it, the kind of machines you might want, the kind of calculations you might take as a rule of thumb, right? And so it's not heavy on math. It's more takes it looks at things more like an accountant type of level, right? Anybody can do the kind of calculations that are in this book, but the idea is to cover all the different principles that would be involved, right? So it starts off with biochemistry, really simple biochemistry, and it walks through what organisms do, and then slowly walks through different example kinds of crops you might want, everything from algae and plants through fish, through cattle, through chickens, everything like that, right? From now till ad infinitum in the future for space settlements. And then it walks through the idea of how you put the whole thing together. So what kind of machines do you have to pump things around, to move the air? What kind of systems do you need, and how do they have to be connected network wise? And then how do you assemble this whole farm into something you can make some rough calculations from?
So, we haven't been to space to do this.
Right,
Uh, nobody's done it. There's no
right.
hardware for it. So, are you extrapolating from what farms do on Earth? Are you guessing if this was actually going to be implemented in space, how much of what you and others talk about would turn out to be what works in space versus, hmm, we guessed that one wrong. Let's go to plan B maybe. Because it's all new and questionable. And I don't want to say guesswork because you're a smart dude, so I think it's more than guesswork. But how do you put it together when there's nothing to go by?
Well, the first thing is I essentially assume a lot of Earth technology can be somewhat adapted. So we already do, for example, a lot of chemical manipulation on Earth using bioreactors, pumps, and things in chemical factories. So that exists. We already have vertical farms. That exists with extensive hydroponic systems, with artificial intelligence systems, with sensor systems, right? Those exist. We already have other types of systems that you could connect those together. We already have pumps that you can use. We have a variety of machinery you can use. The big number one question is, how do some of these behave in less than 1G, right? How do they behave in a third G? How do they behave in 1/6 G, right? What are the differences if the settlement is rotating and it's not ginormously in diameter, right? Instead of being a giant O'Neillian structure, maybe it's only a couple kilometers across. Are there centrifugal forces, right? Those are the unknowns, right? So some of that part's extrapolation. The other part of extrapolation is we're not 100% sure how some organisms are going to react to these different gravity regimes and other regimes that we have. But we have done a lot of work in microgravity, so I've used that. We have done a lot of work on growing things, as I said, in artificial environments. We've done that, right? And so that kind of work all feeds together. And yes, there is some level of hand waving because there has to be, right? We've never grown a whole plant other than we've grown a whole plant in microgravity that we've gone to the point of eating. We've grown whole plants on Earth, but have we grown a whole plant on the moon yet? Nope. Right?
Is,
We've never grown a plant to maturity on the moon. Never happened. We've never grown a plant to maturity on Mars yet. Hasn't happened. Right? Have we grown enough crops in space to even feed the astronauts and complete the oxygen cycle? Nope. China hasn't done it. U.S. hasn't done it.
what's
Nobody's done
the,
it yet.
what do we know about the decline in nutritional value of foods grown in space? Do we know anything about that, or does the ISS give us good information?
So the ISS has given us some information using microgravity, but remember, transpiration does not work the same in microgravity, right? And due to the way the air moves in the ISS, it doesn't move in an ideal fashion anyhow. And what they're growing in microgravity up on the ISS, they're using essentially like a I call it a pillow or diaper system, right? And then the plants they grow are mostly salad greens for all intents and purposes, right? They're not growing the high calorie crops, the big things that you actually need to provide the bulk of your calories in the ISS. So that we don't know that way, but we have known from hydroponics that given the right nutrient solution that you produce, right, you can actually control the nutrient output of the plant if you have the so if you have the right inputs, you can get the right outputs, so to speak, right? You can control the vitamin production and things using the different conditions around the plants, right?
So,
And in the book, I actually cover not just hydroponics and aeroponics, but I go all the way to the point where you're eventually going to go. So, in a long enough, old enough settlement on some place with gravity and access to regolith, you're eventually going to make soil. And soil
so,
provides a nice chemical balancing way to, to get plants that are more chemically resilient and grow better over time, right? But the nutrient balance can be controlled based upon the root environment that you provide for the plants and how much light and other conditions you apply to those plants.
so let me ask you a fun question, probably a silly one, but when my kids did science fair projects,
Mm-hmm.
they had different plants and they put them in different parts of the house and they played 24/7 music to the plants. Okay. The music that the plants, they were all the same plant too. I forget what they were, was classical music. The plants had a better response to. So it seems to me that maybe the plants, which to me are living, that maybe they have some kind of plant consciousness or emotion or something. I don't know. But they did really well with classical music and did really crappy with popular and rock music and loud music. And I did really bad with that stuff in the house too. Do you think that plants being grown in space are going to be pissed off about being in a space environment versus maybe they have some historical knowledge somehow in their fiber that says this isn't right. We shouldn't be here. We should be on terra firma. I mean, I'm being really crazy, I know, but does their consciousness, does their history of where they come from, does it extend to anything like that where they would recognize they're in a crazy environment, not like it?
Gravity would be the one thing I would think that's different. The other one is radiation, right? Those are the two big factors when you move to space that would definitely be different. Noise, I mean, the music experiments happen. I remember those exact same science fair experiments, as a matter of fact, right? And I would think some of that would have to do with the way the vibrations affect the plants. Now, plants have hormonal, they have hormonal warfare. They exhibit with against other species of plants and hormonal cooperation with other plants, right? They'll actually make a cooperative environment in the soil between some plants, and they'll fight against other plants, right? So some plants will actually shove others away, versus some plants are cooperative, like the milpas system, which is a what is that? A polycrop, I guess. I can't remember what that's called. Polyspecific crop
Hmm.
structure, something like that. Anyhow, you have corn, you have beans that wrap around them, and you have squash along the bottom. All those plants are happy together, right? These are all plants that grow in the same environment, and we might very well be doing something like that in space, but there could be other parts of the space environment that definitely are the unknown factors when it comes to growing anything in space. Humans, any kind of crop, and plants, right? I mean, it could be that the chemicals exuded by the walls of the structure cause some kind of problem with the plants. That could happen. It could happen with the people too, right? We know that in the ISS, for example, they have mold issues, right? They have chemicals in the air that they can't smell because their sinuses are all squished up, but they're there, right? I mean, these are problems that they exhibit in current space stations, right? So if you extend them to some place that's another closed environment, right? We should be, one, taking great care for the volatiles that are coming off the wall, right? And other factors that are already existing in the station as it is. And that's those are things we know about. There could be other unknowns we don't know, right? Maybe the moon, maybe the moon's minus of a magnetic field affects things. Who knows, right? The only way to answer these questions is to start doing those experiments, right?
Um,
Mhm.
Marshall, you want to enter the
Yeah,
conversation?
I was going to say the music uh, and sound tests. One of the things is I've been out in the middle of a wheat field in a thunderstorm. I know what the sound is, and I know the wheat's adapted to it, along with the
Yep.
corn, soybeans, etc. So a certain amount of noise is maybe required. On the other hand, uh, a bunch of idiots banging on stuff probably is not required because the fields don't sound like it.
Right. I
Uh,
mean, but then you point to an interesting thing. Plants are very adaptive, right? Most
mhm,
every organism is. Humans are exceptionally adaptive if you think about it. I mean, we live all the way from both poles all the way to the middle and back around again, right?
mhm,
I mean, there are humans everywhere, right? So it's the same idea with plants, right? Plants are exceptionally adaptive. Now, our crop plants are very tightly adapted to certain conditions to optimize their productivity,
mhm.
right? A lot of our crops, like for example, your wheat, right? You grow essentially probably the dwarf wheat strain. Maybe you grow the full size wheat strain that's adapted to drought. Versus
Uh,
maybe in an ideal location, you might grow the dwarf wheat strain that produces more crop per matter in the wheat plant, right?
uh, exactly where I'm going. And now let's talk about the additives, the wheat and the bacterium in the soil, the nematodes, uh, the fungus, et cetera, that needs to be in the soil to make it, oh, yeah, real soil and not just dirt or
Right.
sand.
There is a
And
vast difference, right, between regolith, which is dead, and this living soil biome. Yes.
mhm. and uh, as far as I know, there's been very little science put into that area. And I basically say you can't even start until you figure out how to take something like simulated lunar soil and turn it into real usable soil.
It's interesting you bring that up. So, a buddy of ours, Adam Williams, who several of us happen to know from the NSS, might disagree with you that there's no research in that area. His research area actually takes red worms and uses that with manure and regolith to turn it into a full living soil biome with the bacteria and the mycorrhizae fungus that you're illustrating. Now, those who don't know about plant stuff, anybody who's grown anything in a drought area would know this, is the fact that plants become drought resistant based upon the soil biome, and in particular mycorrhizae and things called rhizomal bacteria, right? So there's a bacterial fungal community that actually helps the plant deal with water better, and it actually makes nutrients in the soil available to the roots. Right now, some of those same funguses and biomes can be grown in a substrate based hydroponic system where you have essentially like chunks of rocks that are porous that can now act as a home for all those bacterial communities, and
Oh,
they can act as a home for the funguses as well if controlled. And so
mhm,
there has been work by Morgan Irons and others specifically on taking um, different types of regolith and different types of rocks, for example, that might be found on the moon or Mars, and then inoculating them with the bacteria and funguses in order to give them that kind of biome. And it sort of
mhm,
is the better that biome is. So this is why you go from aeroponics all the way to the soil is a big spectrum, right? And I do cover this in the book in case you're curious, right? But if you're looking at a spectrum from living soil over here and aeroponics where you have no soil, nothing at all, just spray, right? Which one you think, you get a better community on the far right and almost no community on the far left, right? And the closer
mhm,
that community is, the more chemically resilient the plant's roots are, right? So the more you can essentially
mhm,
screw up, right? If you're in an aeroponic regime, you might have some bacteria and funguses, but you got to be tack on with your chemistry to keep everything alive. Versus the soil gives you a lot of fudge factor because the different organisms in that area will actually give you the balance that you need to keep the plant alive, right? Just
mhm,
like it does in nature. where everything's not perfect, but the soil sort of acts as the, okay, I had a little too much rain today, but a little bit less rain tomorrow, and this piece of soil is minus a couple things, but it might be plus a few more, and oh, by the way, I'm breaking down everything else, right? So living soil is like a giant bioreactor, an aerobic bioreactor, right? It takes in air, and it releases carbon dioxide, and it releases water to all the things that are decomposing in it. But at the same time, it also takes all those nutrients and all those other things and makes them available to the plant.
Mhm.
Right? And so you got to think of it as a living organism all the time. If you get all the way to the point where you have that full biome happening. So aeroponic soil, but the solution's different based upon where you're at, what crops you're growing, and how big of an area you got. Because it takes a long time to make this living soil biome over here. So it might be that a space colony starts off aeroponic, maybe starts off with some soil-based hydroponic system where you got some rocks and stuff, but eventually over decades grows a bunch of soil and starts growing some crops in that soil.
Mhm.
What
Just my 2 cents.
what is
Oh,
the TRL level for space farm development going along with the TRL level for our space settlement efforts to actually be engaged in space settlement and living in a settlement rather than just going up and putting footsteps on the moon and then coming back or something like that where they take their food with them. Is the development of space farming and agriculture moving at a comparable pace to the development of people living in space? Or is one ahead of the other? Or how does that look to you?
Depending upon how much you adapt from what we already do. Like I said, there's already a heavy investment in each one of these technologies. And putting them together to close the loop has been done. China's done this 360 days worth, right? In their own little totally closed cycle system. Now, granted, the humans lost a lot of weight in this process, but they have done that, right? They closed the entire loop using the system, using some of the things that are in that we know about, right? How you close the system, right? Where you grow plants, you eat some, you poop some out, you take the leftovers from the plants, like the silage, you break that down, recover the carbon dioxide and the nutrients, and close the cycle, right? Just with the plant-based cycle, they've done the entire closed cycle. Now, they've also had some experiments using animals, too, with different fishes and silkworms and things like that as well, right? So there have been those experiments already. So that TRL for some of those actually might not be that bad. It's not, I wouldn't say it's at a 7, but, it's not horribly bad, right? Some other technologies, like I said, with the unknowns, that's where you get to you start lowering the TRL level, because I just don't know how some plants are going to grow with a 3rd gravity or a 6th gravity, right? That part I don't know, but there is a lot of work that's already in full existence and a lot of machinery. So the TRL level, I would say, is maybe higher than just figuring out how to make people live in space.
Hey, Bryce, how
If you can
big was
adapt
that
all that
facility?
technology. Huh?
How big was that facility in China that
I
you're
think it
talking
was
about?
a crew of 8.
And were
I'm
they
pretty
producing
sure,
their own
actually. You know what? Give me a second, I'll tell you.
were they producing their own food?
Yes,
And it was totally closed or
it was totally closed. Yes, I'm going to
100%?
give you the name of it here in a second. So they did 100% recycling of oxygen and water, 92.2% system closure, right? And it was called the Lunar Palace 365 mission. And
Well,
then
I've heard
let's
of
see,
Lunar Palace. Yeah.
8 volunteer crew members, 2 groups, and they went through in 3 phases. Now, like I said, the thing they didn't publish, but I've heard by rumor alone, was that they lost a good percentage they lost a lot of weight in the process. The people did, right? Now, my 2 cents on that was, one, they probably didn't have enough crop diversity, right? So you don't have dietary diversity, which makes you unhappy in general. You don't have enough crop diversity, which now you're not getting all the nutrients in the different ways maybe you need them. It might be, on paper, it might look like you're getting enough, but the truth is you might not be, right? And then the other piece is, maybe they need more animals in the system. Maybe they need some shrimp or some fish that at a minimum help close the cycle better, right? But also occasionally add dinner, right? So that's possible they need that, or maybe they need something else, like some better tofu generation. I don't know, right? That, but the Chinese are not going to tell you that, hey, everybody lost 25% of their weight in a year, right? They're just not going to say that. So dietary diversity, which is something I do hit on, right, is the fact that if you don't grow enough crops, you're gonna have, honestly, it's gonna be bad to start with, which is why you're gonna need to send up a lot of stored food to get your kickstart your process anyhow. But your dietary diversity should increase over time so that everybody's happier, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you don't have enough menu options, I don't care what culture you come from, monotony is horrible to psychology. Bad psychology means people lose weight. They're not happy. They don't do good work. And that means long term they don't produce enough babies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you
Right?
mentioned steak in space. You mentioned cattle. I know they're heavy, but man, I want my steak in
And
space.
I think you're going to be getting it manufactured for a while before you get anything that goes moo.
Impossible meat,
Right, right.
John. Just buy the impossible meat and start getting used to it in the supermarket.
Well, I wouldn't. Honestly, I'm not a big. Here's the issue with culture grown meat. So you might not know this, but let's say I make a culture in space. I have the perfect culture that grows whatever kind of magic meat I want. The problem is if it's culture or vat grown, cultures have a big chance of being contaminated, and you lose the whole culture. This is something that happens in the chemical engineering world. Now, I have a brother who happens to work in the chemical engineering world, so he's told me all the horror stories, right, on how bioreactors go bad, right? And that's a risk when you go with strictly culture grown meats. Now, something like tofu is not exactly culture grown. It's actually a very resilient process, right? So you can get culture, you can culture that one pretty good, right? You can get anything you can make with tofu, you can make edible right away, right? Anything you can grind up beans for, got it, right? Whether it's soybeans or peanuts, those are all both good crops. You get lots of oils, lots of dietary opportunity,
Mm-hmm.
right? Those are all things that can give you. But I mean, shrimp, very doable. Fish, very doable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even in a small area, I've done my own experiments on it. I've known lots of people who do aquaculture. I've worked with a lot of aquaculture people. Works out pretty good. Frida Taub, who is the grandmother of all fish in space, she did a whole series of experiments using freeze-dried astronaut poop, fed it to the tilapia, ate the tilapia, closed the cycle.
Um, you've mentioned you like fish. My favorite space animal would be chickens, goats, and mealworms. Uh,
Okay.
what's your
Cup.
what's your three mix?
I cover all of it. Believe it or not, I do cover all of those, right? So the
Mm-hmm.
interesting thing about chickens is, let's say we get a long-term space settlement to the point where we have soil and we can let them pick around in the soil and you have happy chickens, right? You get them outside of a coop. But I cover how to construct that in the book too, by the way, how to construct chicken coops, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of the things about chickens that's interesting is for a long time the balance favors just making egg-laying chickens versus eating the chickens, right? There's a long balance in how many calories and how much protein you get for the
Mm-hmm.
biomass produced per eggs versus actually eating the chickens themselves, right? So
Mm-hmm.
egg production is very heavily favored for a very long time, even once you get chickens, right? Now, goats, as we know, the reason you grow goats on Earth is because goats are great at converting things you can't eat into something you can, right? That's why you grow
And
goats.
milk.
Yeah, and you get milk, but the same thing applies, right? Goats
Yeah.
are the place you grow. If you can't grow cattle and you can't grow sheep, then goats are the next in the list because they'll eat anything, and it could be the cruddiest scrub in the world. In our case, crop waste, which is what most people would immediately assign to goats, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is you'd feed them crop waste from your grains, right? And maybe even things like soybeans and stuff in moderation, right? But you'd feed them silage, and of course, then they could produce more goat, right? They could produce milk, but the thing about milk in goats is you have to make sure that they have proximity to having a baby goat, right? In order to have enough milk,
Mm-hmm.
you have milk production,
Yeah.
right? The other side, but the thing that's interesting about any animal in the system is you might want them for the sole purpose of turning crop waste into dirt.
Right.
They
And
are good at doing it. Most animals are really good at they're great bioreactors for crop waste, right?
yeah. And there's other thing about goats that you missed, and that's cheese for pizza.
Well, yeah. If you don't want to eat tofu cheese, then yes, you can get, or if you don't want to use yeast solids. So if you have a bioreactor with a good yeast culture, hey, I can make yeast solids, and that's what the vegans do, right? They take yeast solids and
Mhm.
they'll make cheese that way, right?
How much weight does a goat take up in mass going to space? What does a typical goat weigh?
Oh gosh, I mean they can weigh up to 60 pounds maybe for a really good
Mhm.
sized milk goat, but
Yeah, but you'd send them up as little kids
I
and
I would argue
and
that
build
you're going
them.
to send any animal up as an embryo, right? And the
Let them
reason
grow
is
up in space.
because
Embryos are a little tough.
yeah, maybe embryos are tough. If it, the problem with mammals or anything that's higher up on the order other than a chicken, which can be shipped as an egg, of course, fertilized
Yeah.
egg. But the thing about mammals, of course, is if the trip's long enough, how are they not going to freak out? Same with any other moving
Mhm.
thing, right? Fish we know can handle space. The Apollo astronauts told us that one, right? We know
Mhm.
from Apollo that fish can handle space just fine. Shrimp probably just fine, right? And then, I mean, by shrimp, I mean any invertebrate in that area, right? Any aquatic invertebrate. I've had somebody in Lincoln University in Missouri propose using essentially what we call scuds or side swimmers, except a larger variety because it can resist freezing. But
Hmm.
those animals are easy to ship, right? The thing that gets hard is anything a higher animal is harder to ship, right? Because of that. How long is it going to take to get from point A to point B? If you're going to Mars, even with nuclear propulsion at a good time, it's 6 months, right? How are you going to keep that thing from freaking out for 6 months?
Uh, Heavy tranquilizers.
But you can't do that for most animals. Do not You can't do that for months at a time. I mean, it's the same problem if you're going to bring your puppy dog, right? You're going to
Yeah,
bring a puppy
yeah,
dog. It's a tenth of a person if it's a small puppy dog, right? I mean, now
yeah.
dogs are used to being around humans, so they're probably not going to freak out as much. Give them a little CBD for the ride up, and then as long as you're not in zero gravity, they're probably okay. But you know, but higher
Mhm.
animals, that's a problem. Is how do you get them to site, right?
Mhm.
Plants, you can ship seeds. Even if you want to grow something that takes a long time to grow, like let's say, oh, I want my coffee, right? So I'll start the coffee bush on the trip out, right? So at least I get a little bit of coffee when I get there, and I start reproducing the plant using, different methods like grafting and things like that to eventually get my coffee bushes and get my citrus, right? So
Mhm.
those bushes you can grow. Yeah, animals like dogs and things like that. Yeah, that's a hard shipment, right? Anything higher animals a harder thing to ship versus something that's you can ship as unfertilized gametes or as eggs, right? So that's the question about things like goats, right? I mean, we'd have to have shipping people right before you start even thinking about shipping goats, right? So that's the downside of goats. Now, the thing about mealworms is mealworms are a larva, right? So you eventually
Mhm.
have to grow the mature beetles, which are the tenebro beetles, in order to grow mealworms. Now, mealworms are,
Mhm.
you can grow them in little shelves. You can slide them into little shelf containers and grow them in
Mhm.
little sawdust piles, essentially, right? And that's a very efficient way to grow them until you get the adults, and then you have to have a certain number of the adults mature to produce more mealworms.
Mhm. But they eat just about anything, from what
Oh,
I
you can
understand.
oh you can make them do waste processing even outside of our agricultural cycle. So you can actually
Yeah.
have mealworms digest plastic if you're not going to eat them.
I was going to say I read an article about them eating styrofoam,
Yep.
and you get huh? They eat that. So it's a good way of getting rid of anything you really have to get rid of.
Yeah, other than an incinerator. Now, an incinerator, of course, is the quick fire way of getting rid of just about everything and converting it down to ash. The only problem with an incinerator is it's not as bioavailable as it would be going through something like a
Mhm.
bioreactor or being digested in the soil.
Mhm.
Is there a commercial market today for space farming products or simulated space farming products?
Well, there's a whole market for vertical farming, as we know, and we already mentioned one earlier about that certain plant everybody likes to turn into different pharmaceutical purposes, um, which is probably the preeminent thing that has illustrated the ability to do closed cycle growth. Right? This is is a certain plant that everybody makes a lot of money on and produces a certain pharmaceutical result, right? That plant is the ultimate in vertical farming and indoor farming, right? And it demonstrates a thing called continuous harvest, which is something that will be critical in space as well. So you can do a thing called continuous harvest where you get fresh stuff every day, and it shrinks the size of the overall farm,
Mhm.
right? That's already been tested. So yes, there is a market for the different technologies we will use because they're already in use, and that they're already in use in vertical farming. They're already in use in chemical manufacturing, right? So bioreactors are in heavy use right now for chemical manufacturing everywhere. A lot of places you'd never think. There's one in Oklahoma that produces xanthan gum, for example, using a bacterial culture, right? Right now, right? Most pharmaceuticals are produced using bioreactors too, right? So the bioreactor technology, it's ready to go. We just don't know how it's going to work in different gravities. But that technology is ready, especially membrane-based bioreactors, which are probably less sensitive to gravity, right? Those are around right now. Algae growth, different algae growth systems, currently in existence as we speak, right? Those are all well developed. And then different hydroponic systems on Earth are very well developed. Again, we just don't know what the gravity effects of some of these are going to be.
Hey, Bryce, do you create a roadmap in your book for how we're going to get space farms started?
I have a evolutionary model sort of spelled out in there of if you start here, you can end up here. But I don't spell out a very specific roadmap because I don't want to dictate architecture to somebody who doesn't, since we're not there yet, right? So since I don't want to limit architects or engineers and how they build their particular farm because it's going to vary based upon the type of settlement, right? The type of
So,
settlement is going to dictate different solutions.
so it sounds like the Chinese are ahead of us.
Yes and no.
Are there any are there any ground-based analogs um, here in the U.S.?
Oh yeah, we Mars Society has several, right? We have different analogs, not at
Are they
scale, I would say, and not
are they
closed
growing
cycle,
are they growing crops?
on small scale. The one that so the Earth, the one that used to be farthest ahead for a fully hermetically sealed result was either at I want to say it's NASA had it. It was either at Houston or Kennedy, and I can't remember where. They had a fully hermetically sealed hangar, right? And in there, they did full closed cycle experiments. They did not use volunteers as much per se, so they used human inputs and human outputs without making anybody live in there. You know, Chinese don't have as much qualms about doing that as we do, but yeah. But they had that was back in the all the way through the early 80s, where we had a full closed cycle system in a hangar using plants and using different types of reaction methodologies to process the wastes. So we actually had the ball, right? And then China has taken it one step further. Now, Russia has done this too, though, in mind. So Russia has done this back all the way through the Soviet Union days. They did it. And then the U.S. has done things like biosphere, as we know, right? That was a fully closed cycle. That was one example of several that we've tried in the United States. So it's not like they're just the only ones who are doing it. It's just they're the only ones who are willing to put somebody's butt in there for, a, you know, months at a time on the risk that they might accidentally die or lose 25% of their body mass.
I'd love to lose 25% of my body weight. Jesus,
Yeah, me too.
put me in there. If they don't
But
have the side effects of the GLP-1s, I'm ready to sign up tomorrow.
yeah, but that's the thing. They in some ways they're ahead of us in those types. And there's some other things they've been doing. So they've been taking crops and putting them up in the space station just to expose them to radiation and get random mutations that they can take advantage of later on Earth, right? And they've actually reaped some rewards from that, but we've done that too, right? We've done those same kind of experiments. So it's hard to say if they're ahead of us per se. There are some agricultural technologies that we're way ahead of them on in a wide variety of different ways just for earth farming,
Mhm.
right? And then bioreactor technology, yeah, we're probably ahead of them in that, I would assume,
Hey,
right?
Bryce,
Yeah. What's up, Doug?
um, have you given thought about is there a sequence of foods that you'd want to start first? Like, say, for example, if you take a look at the percent edible biomass, like lettuce is going to be like 5%, something like that. But something like almonds might be like, I don't know, 2 or 3%. Maybe it might be worth it just to ship the almonds first. Uh, have you thought about that transition to, from maybe the salad crops to tree crops?
Well, one, you're not gonna you're not gonna live on salad alone, right? A man does not live on salad alone, right? So the high value, high. I mean, yes, we're gonna have okay. Salad greens are one I've always looked at. Then you need something that produces oil and a high amino acid content. So it's either going to be peanuts or soybeans, probably. You need some kind of high calorie crop. Do you like potatoes or rice? You probably ought to grow both of those. I would say corn, but corn is a high input. Anybody who's grown corn knows this one. It takes a lot of inputs to grow corn. A whole lot of inputs, right? So that's the corn likes to grow a certain height. It has to have a certain amount of scaffolding. So corn might wait a while, right? But rice and wheat, oh yeah, we could do those. Rice probably is your more dense crop. It's already adapted to wet growing anyhow. And if you're going to start with hydroponics, it's already there, right? So rice, soybeans probably in lieu of peanuts. I'd much rather eat peanuts, and they have more oil than soybeans, which is a good one. You could grow algae in a bioreactor and use the oil from it to get your oil crop, right?
Right.
And then you're going to need some kind of a vegetable set. So some kind of, probably nightshade level plant like a tomato or a peppers, probably both, I would say, right? And that would get you at least started. Now but behind that, if you're talking about tree crops like chocolate, almonds, you're probably going to be shipping coffee until you get your coffee bushes up. You're probably going to anything nut crops like that take decades to grow a tree big enough to get any crop at all,
Well,
especially things like olives.
but Bryce, you could ship stems that are bearing fruit. In other words, you can ship small trees that are bearing fruit.
We already have dwarf varieties of citrus plants that grow fast. You can get
Right.
a lime crop in the first 2-3 years of shipping up the plant. If you ship up a plant, I've done this myself.
Right.
You can get a little plant this big, and within 2 years, limes.
Right.
2 years, oranges. Right. So it does, and that's a, I don't know,
So,
2 meter tall, couple meters wide.
so
Right.
what about the non-tree fruits? Things like strawberries, watermelons, cantaloupe.
Strawberries are a very strong contender
Right.
because they do grow fast. They spread out well. They grow on the ground well. They can grow hydroponically even. So strawberries would be something. So you need some kind of dietary diversity crop, and the strawberry is a good one, right? That's a very good one to consider.
And melons, right?
Yeah, you could definitely grow melons. In fact, I would say if you have the Habitrail tube type of base where you have lots of wall area, it's not that hard to build a tray system that you can grow melons or zucchinis or things like that in.
Right.
Right, that kind of tray system. I actually have one. I have drawn one in the book, as a matter of fact. I have a couple designs for them. There have also been in my papers before too.
What about a form of milk?
Soy milk.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, you're gonna be dead soy milk. Sorry, unless you grow the cultures. I mean, you can create an artificial milk culture. I mean, you can do that too. It's like many people have proposed using a strictly dark cycle and growing dark cycle things to create a glop and glop diet. How many people in here want to eat a glop and glop diet for the remainder of your life? I'm gonna keep my hand down because there's not a chance. And I don't care if you 3D print it from now till the end of time.
Right.
We are not designed to eat that kind of gelatin 3D printed glop diet. We can survive on it. Those hardy astronauts, they can handle it, but you no.
Hey, Bryce, the Space Development Network, we had an agriculture working group, and we have this consensus document. I think you participated in that. Did you?
I did.
Okay. So we on the topic of protein, we felt as though things like crickets are good for processing plant waste into edible protein, but in the group, in our consensus, we actually decided that we wanted to hold off and basically not put it on the human menu because of the ick factor that would steer people away from settlement, which is our goal. Do
Yeah,
you feel the same way?
well, one, it depends on if you've raised crickets. I got my two 7-year-old nieces to eat crickets before, so it can happen. But I would say way before crickets, shrimp, right?
Right,
I
right,
mean, why would I grow crickets when I can grow shrimp?
right.
Right? Freshwater prawns grow just fine. You can do a full aquaponic cycle. They're not that hard if you're already growing algae. They love algae. They love crop waste. Right? So I can create a bioreactor, feed the results of the bioreactor to the algae to the shrimp, take the output from the shrimp, use that for the plants. Done. And eat the shrimp.
Mhm.
Right? A 1 year crop of prawns, 1 year prawns are this big. Right? You can now really harvest them around 100 days. Done it
Mhm.
myself in a cattle tank in the basement. Not that hard.
You
Yeah.
know, Bryce, we
Uh,
talk about at some point settlements will have children, maybe
Yep.
childbirth. What's done, if anything, on foods that would be nutritional and good for babies or children to grow and develop, rather than just talking about foods that adults eat and diversity for adults?
That's a very good question because soy is something that's sort of weird for children versus adults. So it has to be more processed for children because you have to get the esterols out of it, right? Adults can
mhm.
handle a lot more esterol contamination than a child can. So that immediately starts steering you away from that. It's also things like protein, I mean, like peanuts. So kids can eat well on, they love peanut butter. I love peanut butter, right? But they can't live on it long term. You have to have some other kinds of. So children need lots of fats and they need a very diverse amino acid group, right?
Mhm.
And so that means that again is starting to steer you more towards having some kind of animal or at least some kind of yeast developed crop that can produce those extra proteins and fats for children. They need a lot more fat. Now we have fat crops, right? Peanuts are a great fat crop, right? We can actually
Unless
get
you
the
have a
oils out of them.
peanut allergy.
Well, yeah, or you get the oils from algae. Like I said, you grow enough green algae, you can squish the oil out of it and process it. That gives you oils. But for children, yeah, you have to have a pretty wide amino acid profile and you have to have lots of different kinds of fats, not just one kind of
Mhm.
fat, but lots of kinds of fats.
Yeah, I think the biodiversity of food for kids would be off the
Ver-
chart before you'd have tantrums all over your habitat.
Yeah, no, I mean, if they're small enough to breastfeed, well, mama does the processing. But
Right.
Yes. And there's also the fact that the expectant mothers have to have a rather special diet, uh, as you said, added fats, oils, vitamins, minerals, et cetera, which is probably, as my brother-in-law says, getting the wheat out to a sprout is half the job. Well, half the job is feeding the mothers well.
yeah, now they're interesting you bring up sprouts because there are some crops that actually are better if you sprout them and then eat them right off the bat. You can do that with the beans, as we know, right? Any of the common
Mhm.
beans, you get bean sprouts, right? So that is something you can also use to add dietary diversity. But I mean, mammalian reproduction is a big unknown when it comes to space already, right? TBD, right? Nobody
Mhm.
knows. We know microgravity is awful, but nobody's going to live in microgravity full time. That's just not going to happen, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So then the question is, what level of gravity do we need for reproduction? TBD. What level of gravity do we need for children? TBD, right?
Yep.
And
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 gravity could affect the nutrient composition of what you need to eat, right?
yep.
That could very well affect things. But keeping the nutrient levels in these crops is going to be, you're going to have very tight control on the inputs into your crops, right? You need to have very strong control of that if for no other reason, just to make sure you get the full vitamin balance that comes out. And that
Mhm.
doesn't mean just an input balance. That means you got to balance the light levels. That means you got to think about what
Mhm.
CO2 levels do you need in the habitat as well. Now, CO2 enrichment, as we know, is great for crops, right? It's wonderful, makes them grow really well, right? But maybe certain light levels are required to get certain vitamin
Mhm.
levels in the output as well. There is a lot of work on that already. Honestly, there's tons of work on this kind of thing, right? There's tons of work on inputs to get vitamin levels too. I mean, that's just because of earth agriculture. Earth agriculture is so heavily studied in the United States, and the level of data is just amazing for every crop that we grow in the U.S. Right? We know everything there is to know about pretty much every crop you can grow in the U.S.
Huh? What about sunlight? In space, it's 8 times more intense,
Right.
and certain plants have to have an appropriate night and day cycle.
Yep. They
And
also need different cycles based on seasonality.
correct. And then you have on top of that, you've got to pack it all into 1 acre.
Yep. So
And
you're gonna depend. Some crops have different growth regimes for light based upon the time in their life cycle. So when wheat first emerges, it wants bluish light. When it's in the dry out phase at the end, it wants reddish light. When it's first emerging, it wants a different set of humidity than it does during dry out at the end, right? And so that's where you start talking about this thing called continuous harvest, where you have plants actually in different growth chambers based on their growth cycle, and you rotate them in to eventually into the maturity cycle. That's an option if you have a big enough farm, where you can actually have different growth chambers for different crops.
and then you have, how do you mechanically put that into a big tin can, and how do you rotate them around to where they get the right amount of sunlight, the right amount of water, and still be compatible with every other plant you're trying to grow at the same time?
You don't have to grow them. You can grow compatible plants in the same chambers, right? So nightshade plants like to grow together, right? We know that other plants like to grow together. And so you can optimize based on either polyculture or monoculture, depending upon the solution that you need, right? That's part one. Two, you can virtually move them without physically moving them. You can change the conditions in each chamber for a small subset using artificial intelligence, number one, right? And then just using controllable light, right? Using LED light structures, for example.
Oh, so you wouldn't have a window in your space station for sunlight?
I'm not saying you wouldn't do that either. It depends on where you're at, right? If you're on Mars, maybe you get enough light, right? If you're on the moon, maybe you want to grow it in a lava tube and you might need that LED light, right? It just depends. And you have a long night, by the way, on the moon, right? Versus on the Mars, you have almost our same daylight structure. So the regime is going to be different depending upon where you're at. If you're in a rotating habitat, you might go all electronic for everything. Right? There's a series of trade-offs based upon, how much energy do you have available, which is an energy calculation that I cover, right? I cover that, right? Is the different types of energy calculations you might want. But if you have ambient light, there's pluses and minuses to that versus using an LED.
Hey, Bryce. Hey, I know you're an agriculture guy. Would you mind sort of addressing some of the steps after agriculture, meaning things like processing into ingredients, the whole recipe, ensuring nutrition goals are being met, but then like the storage, you don't want to be mismatching the inputs of ingredients and the outputs through recipes.
Yeah, so the inputs and outputs, you are going to need a series of storage tanks for a wide variety of purposes to offer that buffer, right, on different structures. You're going to have different flow rates anyhow for mass through different areas as it is, right? But processing, there's a lot of processing that has to happen to make some foods edible.
So, Bryce, you say tanks, but I'm thinking more things like freezers, refrigerators, dry storage.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, you have to, one, if you have continuous harvest, you should have fresh crops, but you're going to need to do that to have a buffer, right? In case something goes bad, you have a bad day, you need to overproduce a little bit just for that very purpose, right? Space, things go bad, right? Bad things happen, you lose crops. It happens. Right, so that's number one. Yes, you have to have a wide variety of storage mechanisms. I mean, honestly, if we have access to vacuum, well, that one's easy. We can vacuum pack all we want. And we have access to low-dose radiation, which can kill off anything inside of it if we really need to at the cost of breaking down some vitamins. Right, so there's that too. But yes, we will have to have some kind of storage structures for that. As far as processing goes, for example, a lot of foods like soybeans, for example, require extensive processing, but we want to do that for recipes anyhow, right? So soybeans you break down to get tofu, right? You do a series of fermentation steps to get tofu. You have different fermentation steps for wheat if you want beer or breads or other types of things, right? There's several pathways that lead from crop raw part to edible parts, right? There's a whole series of pathways that lead to recipes that have end results. That's sort of the tail of my book, right? Is covering that very kind of thing. Is how do you get from raw crops to dietary options, right? Menu options, things that you can eat. Some of that is going to be involving the spices, right? So the spices are very critical. Now, the upside is I have proposed many times, and I do so in the book, and I've done so in my papers, is that if you have a corner of a habitat, you now have a houseplant, and that houseplant is a spice, right? In addition to coffee and citrus plants, you can also have spices in every corner you have, and that adds your spices, and that's part of your gray water cycling inside the habitat.
So Bryce, I mean, there's herbs and there's spices. It seems to me as though we should be able to grow practically all the herbs, but
Yep.
some spices like cinnamon, which is I think a bark.
Yeah, that one's hard. So is chocolate. Chocolate's a big tree. You have to grow the whole tree. That takes a while to get a big enough chocolate tree to get chocolate. Coffee you get pretty quick though.
For some things, you ship a ton of coffee and you use it sparingly, you know.
Yeah, you ship your coffee initially until you get your coffee crop grown. But you can grow your coffee crop. I mean, coffee bushes aren't very tall.
Right.
And they don't take that long to grow. But some things like cinnamon, oh man, things like nutmeg and cinnamon and those spices, yeah, those are ones that you're going to have a high commodity price on shipping to Mars, and you're going to use it very sparingly.
Right. Hey,
Bryce, about a decade ago on the space show and elsewhere, we talked a lot with the people that were, to many people, perpetuating a scam with Mars One. But the reason I bring Mars One up is they had an elaborate MIT designed greenhouse agricultural oxygen generation plan for food on their one-way Mars mission because they weren't anticipating being resupplied for very long from Earth. And I remember talking to the MIT team plus their faculty advisor, and this was really an elaborate bunch of piping and all sorts of things. Did you ever look at the agricultural plan of Mars One? Was any of that viable, or was it all a scam and nonsense like most of their plans?
I looked at it a while back. I'm going to honestly say it's been it's been a decade ago, and I'm trying to remember how much of that I remember was viable or not. It does take a lot of piping. If you're going to do a hydroponic solution, there is extensive piping, extensive sensor networks, extensive arrays of smart valves and things like that to make it all work.
Yeah, they had equipment engineers just to maintain the equipment. That would be somebody's job. Everybody was going to be assigned a job. So they had people there that would just, their job was to maintain and keep the greenhouse equipment working. And it was really elaborate.
If you can spare the bodies, sure. But I suggest in the book, and I've suggested many times otherwise, that's why you have augmented reality and you have AI.
So right? Talk about
AI can walk you through a repair, right? I could put on some I can take my little tablet and put it in front of me because I know why I know this works, because you can do it right now with a car, right? You can take, and with an aircraft in the Air Force, they can do this right now. You take the little tablet and put it in front of you, right? The AI already knows what's failed. It'll highlight it on the thing. It'll walk you through your habitat to find the part. It'll walk you to where it's broke, right? It'll walk you through the steps for fixing it, right? And then the AI will switch the valves after you've done the switch. As soon as it's done, check it, make sure it works, and you're back to normal. Right, so that troubleshooting, I think, one, you're going to be always expertise short in a space station of any type or a habitat. You're never going to have all the expertises you want. You are going to have to be buttressed by a series of smaller, so not a HAL, but a lot of mini HALs. Right, you're going to be buttressed by all those anyhow. And a lot of the reactions that you have to do inside of these grow areas You can't have somebody whose whole job is just to flip valves and babysit plants, right? That's what cameras are for. That's what sensors are for. That's what AI is for. Lots of teeny AIs and then a couple smarter AIs as you work your way up a hierarchy. And these are things we already have. These are not science fiction AIs. These are AIs we have right now. Yeah.
Bryce, could you, I mean, sort of related to this topic, it seems to me as though there's going to be a lot of labor time, FTEs, full-time equivalents of people that are going to need to be planting and transplanting and, maintenance and harvesting and processing and then cooking from scratch.
Yep.
So it seems like the whole from seed to to food on the plate. It seems like there's a lot of labor in there. Is this too much labor, or is it like 30% of the crew's time?
I would say it's not even that much. Some of it you could robotically assist, and there are robots that already do the kind of thing in vertical farms that do some of this moving stuff around and all that. That some of that already exists. Honestly, I think people are going to want to. Right? I think you're going to have to struggle to keep them out of the green areas. Right? So yeah, I and this whole idea of a sterile habitat where it's all white and no, 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 no. You're going to have your poster. It's going to be cool colors. It's going to be someplace you actually want to live. But people love to play with the dirt. They love to see green. You're going to have to fight to keep them out of there on their off time. I don't think you're going to have a problem finding volunteers who are going to want to play around with the plants for an hour or two a day. Just saying.
Yeah, yeah.
If I may point out, like back in around 1900, the standard farm was 160 acres, not a big
Right.
problem.
My
And the
grandparents was 300, but yeah.
oh, okay, and basically there was a pasture for the horse and the
Mm-hmm.
cows,
Yep.
and there was the cropland for making the crops. But
Yep.
what was more important than anything else was the garden, of which 95% of the women tended very carefully and planned and mixed the plants, etc., to the point that if the husband stepped a toe in without permission, he got chewed out.
Yep. You
And,
bet. That's my
and
grandma Jenny's farm patch. Yes. Yeah, my grandma Jenny managed their 1 acre garden. You bet, for the 11 kids they had, and she picked
11.
two.
Ooh.
Yeah, they had. My dad's one of 11. Yeah. And I used
Well,
to
my
work that.
wife's
I used to
one
work
too.
that farm, and all of our off time was spent working that darn farm. We drive up there to Camp Point, Illinois, and I go play around in the dirt. Yes, I had to. That's how come I know how to drive a tractor and a combine, right? And I know how to butcher hogs and everything else that goes with it, right? But Grandma Jenny, you're right. That was her domain, and you dare not put your fingers in there unless she told you you could.
And there's plenty of that psychology even in modern day women and men.
Yes, they will guard. Yes, there will be somebody whose job is to babysit that garden, and they will get territorial and somewhat about it, but they need labor, right? So they're going to train people
Mhm.
on how to do things. And like I said, there's worst comes to worst, you have augmented reality for the machinery, but the plants themselves, I have a feeling, will be something people want to be trained up on anyhow, right?
Mhm.
And so you will have somebody who owns it. I have a user story in the back of the book, by the way, cover like a little whole sci-fi story of walking through exactly what it's like to live with a farm, right? And I've put that kind of thing in other places too, not just in the book. It's been in other stuff I've done, right? But
Mhm.
yeah, that kind of thing is exactly like that. You're going to have somebody who is essentially the farm boss, right?
Mhm.
Whoever that is, that's going to be their job, and then all the labor that they get part time reports to them when they're doing that function, right?
Mhm.
There has to be some kind of ownership over who owns all these different pieces, right? And the
Mhm.
bigger the farm, the more people you have in charge of stuff, right? If it's a
Mhm.
little farm with 8 people, maybe an 8 person settlement, that's a different answer than when you have 1,000 person settlement, and you're talking, square kilometers of farming area, whether it's
Mhm.
hydroponic or soil or probably some combination of all the above, right?
Mhm. That
Um,
brings up my final question, and then I'll let everybody else talk. and that is, what do you think the maximum number of people per acre or hectare uh, can we get to on a very efficient space farm?
Well, right now you can feed 8 people on an acre on Earth with an Earth farm. That you can do
Hmm.
in ad infinitum, right?
Hmm.
8 people per acre, right? That's doable on Earth. It's going to be a while before we can struggle, honestly, to get that kind of efficiency because that's hard to get that kind of efficiency. But I mean, 4 is expectable for an acre that's in soil. If you start stacking things like you do in a vertical farm, now you get a stacking factor, right?
Right.
So now you
Hmm.
might be talking to much, much more people, right? And I've done a lot of calculations on this kind of thing where, maybe you can do 20 people per hectare, something like
Hmm.
that, if it's all set up just right and it works just right, right?
Hmm.
So 20 people per hectare is a very reasonable number. It could be more efficient than that if you work in different ways. Yeah, Doug?
Yeah. What about mushrooms? It seems like that might be a useful crop.
For a couple wide variety of reasons. One, yes, it has more proteins and you need those. The other reason is the right kind of funguses, and I'm going to put oyster mushrooms and things like that in this category, they break down the thing called lignin, right? So
Mm.
lignin is produced by some crops, right? In their crop waste, it's the woody stuff, and it's a much more complex molecule to break down than cellulose, right? So most of a plant's cellulose, right? The leaves, the stem, there's a teeny bit of lignin in some grains, right? It's not a lot, right? But some crops, they like to produce lots of lignin, right? And oyster mushrooms are the great way to break it down, right? If you don't want to have to use an incinerator on the other side after you've done the slush of, okay, I macerate all the results of the thing, I put it in a bioreactor, I settle it out, I'll let the bacteria go at it, settle it out again, right? Eventually do that, and I end up with the stuff at the bottom that's probably really lignin rich. That's what you feed to the funguses, right? Unless you want to run it through an incinerator. And the beauty of the funguses is, one, I can eat them. Two, oxygen is not your problem, right? When it comes to cycling mass in a farm, CO2 is your problem, not oxygen, right?
Mm.
And the reason is you do not exhale enough CO2 in most scenarios to feed yourself if you're just talking this closed cycle, right? You just don't, right? Because it all gets accumulated in the parts of the plant you don't eat, plus inefficiencies, right? So 45% of a crop is edible, and on a good day, 55% ain't edible, right? That's the part you don't eat, right? So think about it. After a while, all that carbon gets sequestered into that. You got to do something with it, anyhow,
Right.
right? So some of that's bioreactor. Like I said, you macerate it, put it in a bacterial bioreactor, which we already have plenty of on Earth that do that kind of thing. You could drive it into soil, which that works great, and you can feed it all to mushrooms. Just grind it up and let the mushrooms go nuts with it.
And and at the end of the day, you can incinerate it.
If there's anything left, you can incinerate whatever's left,
Right.
right? But
So,
mushrooms are real good at eating that stuff. Oyster mushrooms, especially. And Jane Spetzoff has done a ton of work in that very area, right? Using oyster mushrooms to digest lignin in space scenarios, right?
Brian,
That's her thing.
um, going back to your book, let's assume it gets put on the new book best-selling table at Walmart, Costco, and Barnes and Noble. Yes,
Right.
I agree with you. And a couple of people come up and they're browsing through the books on the table, and none of them are space people.
Uh huh.
And they pick up your book. So are they going to think this is science fiction? Are they going to say, "Hey, this is really interesting. Maybe it's possible in the future"? What do you think the impression would be to a non-space person that picks your book up on say the new book table at B&N?
It's going to be a wonderful walkthrough of nothing else of current agricultural technology. If nothing else, you will know where your dinner comes from. That's exactly your dinner right now on Earth. Now, I'm not talking about the super high tech part of the farming world because in reality, soil farming nowadays is wicked high tech, right? Space data, microclimate analysis, micro analysis of everything in the whole field. But put all that aside, you walk through this book, you're going to know how much effort it takes to get your bread. You're going to know how much field it takes to get corn to grow, right? You're going to understand a lot more about where your dinner comes from. If nothing else in the book, you will definitely start getting it
What's your
about
page
agriculture.
count Is it a big book?
480 something.
Are you doing pre-orders on Amazon?
Yes, they're taking them now. It's expensive though. I'm going to tell you right now, the hardcover's a little pricey. It's $200 because of all the illustrations, because it's got 300 plus illustrations.
Well,
Because the whole book is
spring or
meant so that a regular person can walk through it. Yes, it's written for use in courses. You could definitely do that.
Mhm.
But it has a bunch of diagrams. Lots and lots and lots of diagrams. And lots of tables. The diagrams are what drove up the cost, and so are the pictures in it. Lots of pictures. Yes, Doug.
Uh,
Um, can you walk us through the meats like I'd be interested in like chicken, maybe quail, turkey, but also pigs, goats, rabbits, maybe,
I
and
cover all of them. They're
eventually
all in there.
cows. When do we see these different things?
I would say cows are way out there after you get a big soil farm and a whole lot of area and figure out how to ship them as embryos, right? That's where your cows are. Pigs are way before that because they can digest any or anything, right? And then way before that are a wide variety of birds. Chickens are, of course, heavily optimized on Earth for eating already, right? It wouldn't take much to make a Martian chicken or a moon chicken, right? Those are the kind of things you should be able to develop breeding wise. I mean, we understand their genomes extremely well. We can manipulate chickens to do whatever we want, really. Quail and other stuff, I mean, I look at other bird species. I do look at turkeys because, yeah, I like to eat turkey. But I look at several other species of birds as well. It's just like rodents. I look at a lot of rodents, too, like guinea pigs, agoutis, rats, right? I've looked at those are covered. Yeah, I know. Not everybody eats them in our culture, but if you're in South America, you like guinea pigs. I have to cover them, right? I cover rabbits, right? Turns out rabbits have a lot of gut mass. Yeah, I cover. You're going to have rabbits before you have any other mammal almost. Rabbits are some rodent way before you have any other mammal, right? You're going to have birds before you have any of those because you can ship them as eggs, if nothing else, and they grow really fast. Before that, something aquatic, right? Shrimp, fish, amphipods of some type. Those clams, snails, right? Land snails and other snails. They can be a side dish. They will never be a main dish,
For the
right?
French settlers?
Well, for cleaning stuff up,
Oh,
right? You might use snails to clean up your aquaponic structure. You might use snails to clean up your hydroponic structure, right? They can be something that you have just as sort of a cleaner crop, and you might occasionally eat them, or you just might not, right? You use them as something that's a cleaner, if nothing else. You use clams are great filters, and you can eat those, right? I cover those in there. They're again a side dish, right? And then if you go to the other side of that, right, is before that, then you're talking things like shrimp and fish, which we know we can grow. Tilapia are a good crop. Anything that was an invasive species is a great crop when it comes to animals. So anything that looks like an invasive species is wonderful. Silver carp and tilapia are great for that. You'd think it would be carp or something else. Yeah, I'm the one thumping the table on accident. I apologize. Habit. But it's what happens when I teach too much. So anyhow, yeah, before that, again, shrimp and then micro crops of some type. Now before that, you're talking the vegan stuff, funguses, yeasts, plants.
Bryce, what about genetically modifying maybe bacteria to do optimized production of protein? Is that realistic?
In a very early settlement, it would be an option as a backup. I would have that kind of solution as a backup, just like I would have a yeast culture as a backup as well. You could have an algae culture again as a backup, right? Those things, you can live on glop. Like I said, you can literally close the cycle with algae, yeasts, some kind of bacterial bioreactor, right? You can close that whole cycle. It would keep you alive. You wouldn't like it. It would be horrible.
And
But you can do direct assembly too. Like you can actually take raw molecules of CO2 and water, and using enough power, you can actually directly assemble carbohydrate. That can happen. There are machines that do that. They're extremely power intensive, and a high radiation environment would make me very nervous for such a machine, right? I'm just saying that's not. You could do it as a backup. You're going to need some kind of bioreactor just to produce things like, maybe vitamin supplements anyhow, small bacteria bioreactors to produce different biochemicals that you might need for other purposes, different biologics and things like that, right? So those you'll have, but yeah, I mean, you could have bacteria produce all the protein you want. You can bioengineer them, and you better hope that culture never gets contaminated. You better have lots of backup cultures. You better have stored that genome really well, and you better be able to regenerate it very quickly.
Well, people also mention lab-grown meat, which I think sort of fits in here. How practical is that?
Depends on how good you can keep the culture. It takes a lot of resources to produce that beyond whatever stuff, right? I mean, it doesn't taste bad. I mean, but if you're going to do that, why do you even need that? I mean, do you have to have that versus just taking a lentil burger, right? Or a soy burger, right? Or a tofu burger? I mean, if you're going to go through that route, you might as well just go the other route and do it the way half the planet does it.
Right.
I mean,
Hey,
you can,
Bryce.
but the lab grown meat's possible. It's just that it's given the high level of that kind of machinery and how touchy the cultures are. Radiation is a big risk to any of that, and so is contamination. So you're going to have a lot of backup cultures anyhow for other stuff. Now you need extra backup cultures for that.
I would say, ask how would all this work in something like an O'Neill colony or a long duration space vehicle? This most have been talking about like on like Mars or something or Moon.
I just use those as examples, but in an O'Neill colony, you have 1G. That's if it's big enough, and the centrifugal. Now the centrifugal effects on plants, we don't exactly know. Maybe they grow spiral or something like this when you're trying to grow them straight up. If it's small, like a Kalpana or something like that, where it's a smaller station. If it's O'Neill size, Earth. O'Neill already covered a lot of that. Our crop efficiencies are dozens of times more efficient than when he did that first study, though. Like our crop technologies for soil growth are way more efficient than the 70s and 80s, right? Not quite an order of magnitude, but many multiples more, right? Because it's just that more advanced. It's amazing how much more you grow on an acre now than you did when he wrote that summer study. But if you have an O'Neillian colony, I mean, if it's big, you might as well have soil, and then you might as well grow it using the top technology you use on Earth. Done, right? People get to walk around in fields because you have plenty of space, but I've always made the assumption, in this book included, that enclosed volume comes at a premium, whether it's a rotating habitat or whether it's on a planetary body. Right? Now,
Nice.
rotating habitats, like I said, if you have 1G, we know what plants grow like in 1G. The only weirdness is going to be what happens with the centrifugal forces, right? Because, you're rotating it, and so you could end up with some kind of spiral effect, but I would imagine it's not any worse than what happens to people in such a habitat already. So I would think it's very surmountable. In fact, you might be better off in a rotating habitat than trying to grow in 1/3 or 1/6G. Just
So,
saying.
Bryce, I had a question for you.
Uh-huh.
Um, so I was wondering, like they did Biosphere 2 quite a while ago now, and I
Yep.
was wondering if the timing is right for another large scale long duration experiment like that with people and a biosphere in a closed environment, very circulated, regulated closed environment. Do we need to learn more before we try that experiment again, or are we ready to do it and prove that we can do it? What do you think?
Bill,
Well, the Chinese have already done it. So they did something like that very recently, right? They
are
did a study exactly like that, but biosphere is much larger with a much more diverse structure. Of course, that's something we should do, right?
well,
Just to nail down a lot of variables. But until we do lower gravity things for planetary bodies, I mean, we're at the point now where we need to start looking at what it's like to grow whole plants to full crop them inside of some kind of gravity in space, whether it's rotating or whether it's on a planetary body.
so
I think.
are you
Go
guys
ahead.
about a ecological approach like Biosphere 2 did, or just a large greenhouse approach? Because those are wildly different.
They are very wildly different. The SAML approach is more greenhouse-ish anyhow. So the same people who did Biosphere, of course, had the SAML structure. That's Kai Stats and that team out there at Arizona, right? They already have a sealed structure sort of like that. And I think it is time for a larger scale version of not quite Biosphere, where they were trying to duplicate Earth ecology. So instead of that, right, more of a greenhousey structure like the Chinese did, except maybe with more Americanized dietary scales and stuff.
Or like ISS?
Yes, of course, like I says, but that's not fully sealed right now.
Right.
Anyhow, that's a
Guys,
small. That would be a small thing that would establish some data, though. I'm definitely championing it, as you know,
Yeah.
right? But I think making a full hermetically sealed one, given a lot of money, sure, heck yeah, that would nail down a lot of variables.
guys, we're coming up on the end of the show in about 9 or 8 minutes. So if you want to say something and you haven't, or additional, now's the time to do it. But Bryce, just thinking about what all you've talked about and what everyone else is talking about, I'm wondering if you have ever seen any kind of space animal rights or plant movement spring up saying you can't just manipulate and use life and do this and do that. And it wouldn't surprise me. And I'm just wondering if you've ever caught wind of anything like that.
Well, we know PETA does not like farming on Earth, so that's an easy one. For anything with plants, yeah, they're going to be upset no matter what we do. You're going to have people who are going to be upset about it. Some people have religious beliefs against such things too. Remember, you have whole groups of Hindus who are not big on eating some kinds of animals already, right? If you're
Right.
Jewish, you want your cat, you want to follow kashrut law, right? If you're Muslim, you want to follow halal dietary restrictions, right? So it's sort of going to be interesting. The culture of your settlement is going to dictate what menu you want, which then is going to dictate what crop you grow already. That's going to happen, right? But yeah, I could see there being people that definitely do not like the idea of shipping animals up to space. There are people who will fight that. Absolutely. As far as plants go, we already manipulate every plant on every crop plant we have has been either selectively bred or directly manipulated or both. Right? Everything you already eat right now that goes in your belly, unless you're growing it all yourself, right? If you're going to the supermarket, that ship sailed for plants. We already manipulate the heck out of them.
Will a vegetarian or vegan have a place in space down the road, or are they just SOL?
Actually, they might be better off. At the beginning, you might be better off being one of those. I mean, let's be honest, right? It's going to be a while before I get all my animals up there at any large scale, right? Small scale I might start with, but I mean, honestly, you're going to have a plant, fungus, yeasty diet unless your settlement gets above a certain size, right? So,
How long until a Mars settlement no longer needs to be supplied from Earth, in your opinion?
well, Mars is nice because you already have a lot of in situ carbon dioxide and water. The question is going to be, do you get all the minerals you need, right? Can you get those all from the regolith on Mars? That's the question that really dictates resupply, right? So it could take 5 to 10 years after you built it, after you played with it, after you've settled it. If I were shipping food out to it, though, because you can get the balance pretty quick, I think, just getting the mass cycling. If you came out with 2 years worth of preserved food, you'd probably be okay, most likely, right? Before you're at the point where you start maybe you start exchanging with Earth different things. But I don't see. I mean, you're going to have a trade web no matter what. There are going to be some things that you're going to want from Earth, like the cinnamon we talked about, right, or chocolate, right? That kind of thing is going to happen, even if you get the basic dietary requirements down, right? There's going to be
Doug, do you
some
have a
kind of
final
trade.
question for you?
Well, yes, and sorry, it's a bit of a big question, but maybe Bryce, if you could summarize it, going from here to there, what do we need to do in terms of further studies, and how realistic is it that that we're going to be able to accomplish those studies before we have starships landing cargo and then crew on the moon and Mars?
Depends on how quick they get starships landing on crew on the moon or Mars. I mean, that might be a 10-year question, and then yeah, we're going to have to really, really hurry to get anything else we want to figure out, right? It could be that you figure out some of this on-prem. The thing about the moon is you can ship there quick, and if you screw up, you can resupply, right? If you're on Mars, that's a whole different problem,
True.
right? Because resupply is months away, right? But I mean, Things we need to get done, yes. We need to get a little we might need to get a little better at the whole integration puzzle that the Chinese have done, and we need to probably duplicate too, where we have a fully closed cycle and then really get some of the machinery and AIs trained here on Earth for that. So I would say we need to do that now more than later, right? Next 5 years ideally, right? And then we need to start shipping things into space and growing whole crops. Right now we play around in the ISS. That just ain't big enough. We need to do something on a larger scale, probably on either a planetary body, or if we get lucky and build a rotating settlement, which will still take 20 years. I mean, take 20 years to build a big rotating settlement, but we could use the Haven facilities and start doing a lot of plant testing now, right? That wouldn't take that long. If we get a Haven module up and they start rotating it in the next 5 years, that would be one that would definitely be a big win to see how plants grow in at least a rotating habitat, if nothing else. And the same on the moon. We could do the next 5, 6 years. We could definitely send plants and grow them to full maturity on the moon. China's already planning on doing it. That's already on their schedule. So in the next 5 years, they're doing that. They're going to send plants there and grow them to full maturity on the moon just to see what happens.
Anyone else have a closing comment or quick question they want to ask Bryce, or do you have a closing comment, Bryce?
No, I thank everybody for their time, for listening to me. If anybody has any closing questions or commentary, I think it's doable. I think everything I've outlined in the book and all my papers to date and everything I've said, we have the tech now. We just need to certify it in space. And we need to really think is the biological questions we have to hammer down, right? We need to hammer down what plants do when they have different gravity regimes or even in rotating habitats. We just don't know. But as far as the tech goes, I mean, we've already got there. We just got to integrate it, right? We already have the AI. We already have pumps. We already have electronics. We already have artificial lighting. We have heating. We have chemical separators. We have all that tech now.
Does
It's just a matter of
SpaceX
sticking it together.
does SpaceX talk to you about any of this for their Mars missions with all their people that they plan on taking there?
I wish they would talk to me. I've met Gwen Shotwell before, and I've talked to some of the SpaceX people, but they have not officially called me and said, "Hey, Bryce, how do we do this?" Right? But I hope they're talking to somebody. I mean, there's a lot of experts in this field. They just need to pick some of them and start working. So I'm far from the only expert in this area. I've just been the one who was crazy enough to assemble it all into one comprehensive volume, right? But there is a lot of experts in these areas, especially in different special areas. There's tons of people out there, right?
Well, I want to thank you for returning to the show. Best of luck with your book, and
Thank you, sir.
I hope a lot of people read it and get educated. And we'll look forward to seeing you at NSS meetings and talking to you again on the space show. Marshall was with us, John Jossie, John Hunt, Dr. Doug Plata, Phil was with us. Any of you guys want to say anything before we sign off real quick? Going once, twice.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank Bryce again, and I also wanted to let you know that I did post our blog post on David's blog. So I really appreciate you working with me on that, and um, yeah, it was a lot of fun working with you on that. So thanks.
I love talking to all you guys, as you know, in
Thank you
person
very
or
much.
otherwise. So,
Yeah.
Very
Merry
good
Christmas.
show.
Happy New Year to everybody. Well, I'll talk to you all later. And
hey, thank you.
hopefully you'll be with us on Friday and Sunday. Everybody have a great week. Keep looking up. And goodbye from the Space Show.